So now, with the understanding that they should be learning to take notes and apply that later on, you've modeled the annotating.
Yes.
How did you deal with note-taking?
Okay. We sort of morphed annotating into note-taking. The first thing that we did is we read the next text, which is Everyday Use by Alice Walker. We did a whole class reading of that text, and at the conclusion of reading it, we sort of did a nuts and bolts discussion of the literary elements of that text, characterization, plot, setting, all of those things that you would normally do when you teach a work of literature.
The what of the story.
Exactly. But then we had to direct students to come back to what our focus is, which is looking at the use of figurative language. So we went back through the text. We revisited the text a second time.
I think that's important.
Yes, absolutely.
Because close reading requires multiple readings.
Absolutely, it does.
And you see things differently often the more you read them, and you read them differently with different questions in mind. Keep going.
Yeah, and so and students actually would visit the text a third time when they actually began writing their essay, but we'll talk about that later. So as a class, I have a document camera in my classroom, so I can project what I've done to the text itself on screen for my students to see. So I had highlighted and labeled the identifying figurative language. Like I'd already labeled, this is a simile, this is a metaphor.
You just laid that out there.
I just laid it out there. Okay. Then students used a tree map to organize and categorize their figurative language, and they're thinking about that figurative language. And my co-teacher in my Block 67 class modeled this for them.
So you have a co-teacher for special ed students?
I do, in one of my classes.
Okay.
Yes. And so as I'm at the document camera with the figurative language highlighted and labeled, she is then old school using an overhead projector to model this note-taking process for our students utilizing a tree map, which is a map that they would be familiar with.
So it looks like you're still doing a lot of the work in terms of identifying this, and they're transferring it onto a tree map. So what you're sort of guiding them through, holding their hand, is the process of organizing their thinking into something outside of the text.
Yes.
What is the purpose going to be of that?
These notes then become part of their pre-writing process. They would use these notes to select the figurative language that they want to do a more in-depth analysis of within the body paragraphs of their essay. In addition, a piece of figurative language would not have been map-worthy, that's what I call it, map-worthy, if a student could not have explained the author's use of that figurative language. So, for example, pick any of this figurative language that's on here. Someone in that class would have needed to raise their hand and be able to explain in an articulate manner what that figurative language meant, what's the real meaning behind that, or better yet, how that figurative language added depth to the text. And again, by doing that, we're modeling that thinking process that they're going to need when they sit down to actually write their essays.
So nothing goes on the map unless somebody can explain to you why the author used that language.
Sometimes that somebody might have been Miss Foster or Miss Pace, who is my co-teacher in my co-taught class. Now, in my class that's not co-taught, it was by and large student-generated. There might have been one or two of my explanations, but mostly student explanations before it could be considered map-worthy.
Map-worthy. Okay. So our next step, I guess, is to see how they're going to take independence.
Yes.
And learn how to do this analysis on their own without your support.
Exactly.